Hey, it's Jael from Cell Based Nutrition, and today we're going to talk about being believed when living with an invisible illness. So, living with a condition that people cannot see often means that people have to take your word for it when you reach capacity, when you are in pain, and when you are fatigued. They are looking for signs of what they perceive disability to be, or how they expect disability to be performed. And so it means that we are in a constant place of juggling depending on who is making the observation. And this performative dance is exhausting. It's also demeaning, and it means that because it's so subjective, that we don't even know if we have passed the test, depending on who's giving it and what they are seeing and thinking and feeling at the time. Let's take a very common example of having to call in sick to work. This is a slightly easier process if you have a cough or a cold or a sore throat, because there's at least some sound effects that come along with that, the sneezing, the coughing, the hoarse voice, etc., etc. But what if your reason for calling in sick is because you've had a flare up or a pain crisis or a bout of extreme fatigue? How can you make your voice reflect that? How many of us have sat staring at our phones an hour before we need to call in, thinking, are they going to believe me? What am I going to say? How am I going to say it? How can I express that I need time off when there's nothing wrong with the sound of my voice? It's such an impossible situation that we are put into. Instead of the world treating us like competent adults who can make judgment calls on their own well-being, we instead are treated with suspicion, treated with doubt, and it's so difficult not to internalize that, especially when you've been living with chronic pain for any length of time. We feel the constant need to explain and over explain, the constant need to apologize for being unwell, the need to monitor our tone even when we are frustrated at having to remind whoever it is that we're making that phone call to, or whoever it is that we're asking for an adjustment from, because we don't want to sound like we are exasperated, we don't want to sound like we're frustrated, we don't want to sound like we're annoyed. But it is all of those things when you have to perform your disability so that an ableist world can recognize it as valid. Sometimes we even edit our pain to make it sound reasonable. I've said before, when my mum checks in with me on how my pain is, it's a running joke, and this joke has been running for decades at this point, that it is often easier for me to say where does not hurt than for me to give a list of the places that do hurt. And I'm sure there are so many of you that can resonate with that. That when you are going through a pain flare up or a crisis or whatever the terminology is in your particular illness, it can sometimes be systemic pain, full body pain. And for the average person who doesn't have lived experience of this, that could be very difficult for them to understand and very difficult for them to believe. And when we are honest, sometimes people assume that we're being dramatic or over egging the cake, when honestly, a lot of the time, we are being very understated in terms of how we really feel. When we are not believed, it causes a tension in our nervous system. There's almost like a sharp intake of breath. We get stressed, our shoulders tense up. For me, sometimes I lose ability to focus and to frame my words and what I want to say. People's disbelief can come as quite a shock, even when you've experienced it before. You feel braced, you feel that tension, you feel like you have to guard yourself and defend yourself. And for many of us, this is a rinse and repeat. This is a pattern that we have to experience over and over again. Something I haven't talked about yet, but I want to go into at some point in more detail. If any of you have had the misfortune of having to deal with a benefit system that seems to be targeting those of us living with disabilities, a benefit system that isn't fit for purpose, and a benefit system that has such inherent built-in biases about what a disability looks like, you will absolutely know the feeling of not being believed on a systemic level. And for many people, this is despite having produced dozens of pages, sometimes hundreds of pages of medical information. Some of the most personal information about how your condition affects you on a daily basis. And even despite having the backing of our medical professionals, some arbitrary paper pusher makes a decision that knocks you for six because, again, you weren't believed, and this time you weren't believed in a formal letter. Belief is something that has the power to regulate our nervous system. Belief is something that has the power to make us feel safe. Belief it's not a fixing of our conditions, but it's a gentle affirmation of what it is that we are going through. It's a nod to let you know that you are safe with that person or in that space or in that company. It's trust that you are a competent, trustworthy, reliable adult who has permission to state what your limits and your capabilities and your capacity is. It allows you to live with less urgency. It allows you to live with less proving. It allows you to live with a little tiny bit of softening. When you're believed about the pain, the fatigue, the discomfort that you feel, it makes you feel like you're less alone. It's one less hurdle to jump over. You know, when we speak about privilege in any capacity, what we're really talking about is you have less hurdles to jump over. Imagine a race, 110-meter hurdles. You have, 12, 13 hurdles that you need to jump over before you reach the finishing line. Privilege means that some of the hurdles are not in your way. Hurdle of fatigue is not in your way. Hurdle of pain is not in your way. Hurdle of mobility is not in your way. And so obviously people who do not live with chronic illnesses have less of an understanding of what it feels like to have to jump all of those 13 hurdles, to be able to get a little bit of empathy or a little bit of compassion or a tiny reasonable adjustment. When you are believed, it changes something in your body. A couple of videos ago, I was at an event for people living with sickle cell and chronic illness. And in that room, although we were all living with different conditions, some of us with the same conditions, but the way a condition manifests differently inside one body from another. But the one thing that we didn't need to do was to explain, because we all knew. We could just name the conditions that we had and name the experiences that we lived with. And there was a feeling of safety and there was a feeling of understanding. You know, when we took turns talking about work, for example, there was not a single story that I heard that I did not believe, because I have either experienced it myself or I have heard it from another disabled or chronically ill person before. And I can imagine for the able-bodied person, they may question whether there is some over-exaggeration taking place, and I guarantee you that there is not, because often when we talk about our experiences outside of a community of people who are also living with chronic illnesses, we dumb down the stories. And if the dumbed down version of what we are saying is not believed, then we just have this internal tightness that tells us that you absolutely wouldn't believe the true fullness of everything that we go through. Many people who live with chronic pain have never been fully believed, not by their friends, not by their family, not by their GP, not by their medical professionals, especially those of us living with complex medical needs, where we have symptoms that don't quite fit neatly in a box. And for those of us who are living with conditions that haven't been named yet, that haven't been diagnosed yet, that haven't been given language yet. And that disbelief, especially when it lasts for long periods of time, does something to a person. It chips away at the way we see ourselves. It chips away at our self-esteem. It chips away at how we see ourselves. It makes us overthink how we can explain our condition. It would be wonderful if we lived in a world where we don't have to earn belief. If you're within a chronic pain community, a community for those of us with long-term health issues, with disability, we know amongst ourselves that our experience, our lived experience, is enough. For the rest of the world, if you are here, if you're eavesdropping, if you are listening, it would be great if you didn't rely on your senses, as in what you see and what you hear, because that doesn't give you a full picture of what somebody is experiencing. Many people with chronic illnesses have learnt to cope in silence, because when we have spoken out, we have not been believed. And so we dim our voice. We minimize our pain. We try to cope. We try to push through. We try to appear as able-bodied as possible. It would be great if we lived in a world that believed people when they say that they are in pain, or when they say that they are fatigued, or when they say that they have reached capacity, when they say they have reached their limits, and support is forthcoming. This was a pretty difficult video for me to make. In my mind, I'm thinking about all of the times when I have spoken out about how I feel and when I wasn't believed. And it doesn't matter how long ago those situations arose, it still hurts. It's still tinged with frustration, and it's still tinged with sadness. And for me, in those times, felt so helpless. And I know people who are feeling exactly the same way right now. So, if you would like to share your experiences, I'd love to read them in the comment section. I read all of the comments, I respond to all of the comments. I would love this to be a safe space where we are able to talk to one another, where we are able to support one another, and where we don't have to do any proving. We can exist in a space where there is an automatic belief and understanding. And that's one of the reasons why my pain and fatigue liberation method is a group cohort. I first was thinking about doing it as an individual course, but then I remembered that it is so important for community when we're living with chronic pain, because a lot of us live with that pain in isolation, even if we physically share a home with others. We are individually dealing with our pain ourselves. And so when the doors open to my cohort, I will let you know. Details will be made available. And I do look forward to working with those of you who would like to work with me. I am a complementary therapist, I am a naturopath, I am a nutritional therapist, and I use all of these modalities to provide science-based, evidence-backed strategies to help people living with chronic pain and fatigue to manage their symptoms better. So I'm Jael from Cell-Based Nutrition. It has been lovely speaking to you. Please like, please comment below, please subscribe, please share this video. It would be great if we can build a community here, and so others who need to hear this message can hear it. And I just want you to remember that your body is not broken. Your cells are just undernourished. And I will see you in the next video.